Welcome back to the Means Report. We appreciate you staying with us as we cover a lot of ground during this half hour, talking about the protests and the pandemic. And Georgia's senior senator, kind enough to join us from Capitol Hill, Senator David Perdue. Senator Perdue, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Hi, Brad.
Senator, my first question has to do with the protests. And we saw Governor Brian Kemp recently deploy National Guard troops all over the state of Georgia to keep demonstrators and bystanders safe. Can you do anything law enforcement or protection-wise for Georgia from the federal level?
Well, Brad, first of all, my perspective is obviously these are tragic events. They're horrible. I'm upset about it. I know a lot of people are upset about it. But to take a peaceful demonstration, as we saw in Atlanta over the weekend and other cities, and let it turn into a violent protest doesn't solve the problem. It detracts really from the fundamental problem that we have. And I really applaud President Trump and Bill Barr, the Attorney General, for taking swift action. They have called for an expedited investigation. A police officer in Minneapolis has been arrested and charged with murder. There may be some other arrests made in that incident. And Attorney Barr has spoken out on both incidents, the one in Georgia and the one in Minneapolis. So from a federal level, I think calm is the word right now we're trying to plead for. I think Governor Kemp's done a good job calling out National Guard and doing the things he should do as the leader in the state. I support him in everything that they're doing right now. And my prayer is that we'll look each other in the eye and do this peacefully, and let's get some results. We've come a long way in America in the last 50 years. I hate to see it undone by a few people who are instigating some of these violent protests.
Senator Perdue, let me switch gears and talk about the pandemic now. And it seems, I don't know if you've been back in Georgia and been out to Lowe's or Home Depot, but it seems like a lot of people are leaving this pandemic in the dust. Do you think it's okay to start to let our guard down?
Well, I wouldn't let our guard down, but I think it's absolutely okay to follow the president's phased approach to get this economy going again, Brad. I was one of the big advocates up here to talk about if you're going to shut the economy down, you've got to start right away talking about how do you reopen it. Anytime you disrupt the supply-demand cycle in a free market economy, you know, we've never done that before, and so it's going to be bumpy. I acknowledge that we're still fighting the virus, but at the same time, we have to reopen our economy. I think what Governor Kemp and the people in leadership in Georgia and other states that have begun to reopen according to the guidelines and the protocols that have been called out, I think it's the right thing to do. Let me give you an example. We've had essential workers now working through this pandemic. They're the heroes of this crisis. They've been following protocols all along, social distancing as best they could, using protective equipment where they could. And we've seen them manage through. The same thing with our U.S. military. I think we can do that in our regular businesses now. And as long as we follow the protocols and are careful with it and protect the people most vulnerable, we can certainly do this.
You know, Senator, a lot of health care providers in the state of Georgia and across the nation were concerned about personal protective equipment and a dwindling supply of that. Have you been able throughout this pandemic to help improve that stockpile and get that equipment where it needs to go?
Well, Brad, that's a great question. You know, we fought that from the very beginning. One of the great learnings that we have in this is that the strategic stockpile of protective equipment, personal protective equipment, PPE, was not adequate. Neither was the capacity to test and to screen Americans the way that we needed to in a serious pandemic like this. This is the 7th one of these we've had in 10 years. We put $16 billion in to strengthen that strategic reserve. In the state of Georgia, you see regular Georgians stepping in to fill the breach. There's an apparel company in Savannah that they stopped profitable orders and started making masks. We see people in Augusta doing the same thing. As a matter of fact, Augusta University, Augusta Hospital actually gives free personal screening online to people who want to do that or who need to do it. We are now, anybody in Georgia who wants to be tested can be tested. I think the country as a whole has gone in the last 6 weeks from 1 million tests a week potential to now over 14 million. That's a step in the right direction. We've got a long way to go.
Yeah, it really has been an incredible improvement in that area. What about telemedicine, telehealth? Senator, we've seen that really take center stage during this outbreak. You don't have to go to the doctor. You can just visit your doctor online. if you have internet access, but a lot of rural Georgians don't. Right. How can you and other lawmakers help improve internet access for those folks?
Well, even before COVID-19, this is one of the great opportunities we have in America is to develop our rural communities. Look, in the state of Georgia, we've had urbanization for the last 50 years. It's time that we deal with this problem. And one of the biggest things we can do to keep our young people down home is to give them broadband. And so the federal government and the state are partnering now. I know that the Department of Agriculture has several of these in the state of Georgia where they put a couple $2 billion toward this. There are 5 counties in southeast Georgia. I went down there with the governor and the Secretary of Agriculture, Perdue, to inaugurate this. We're trying desperately to bring that, but it's one of the great opportunities we have to develop our rural communities, our hospitals, our education capability. You mentioned telehealth. Well, what about teleeducation? All the things that we've taken for granted that we had to be face-to-face, we're now seeing other opportunities. I mean, my middle name now is Zoom or WebEx. I mean, we've been teleworking in my office during the entire crisis. Although I was traveling around the state, we were doing a lot of our work, constituent calls and so forth. We've reached out to almost 1 million people in the state of Georgia, Brad, and talked to almost 100,000, listening to their questions, giving them advice about where to go to get help, how to see about their aid, who to find out what they need to do about a health issue. We're all soldiering through this. I'm actually been very impressed with how Georgians have stepped up in a moment of crisis. It's no surprise. Americans deal with these crises better than anybody else in the history of the world, frankly.
Senator Perdue, I suspected our time would fly by, and it has. I know that you're always so gracious with your time, and we appreciate you giving us some insight from Capitol Hill tonight very much, and I hope you stay safe and well. Well,
Brad, that's my prayer for you. Stay safe, stay well, and let's look out for each other, and let's be a little more patient with each other as we get through this crisis. Thank you, Brad.
Thank you so much. U.S. Senator David Perdue.